All right, now a report by Business Daily indicates that a state agency is investigating Sport Pesa for possible money laundering amid claims that the sports betting firm wired $278 million, that's about 30 billion Kenyan bob, from its local accounts to offshore banks. Now, the Financial Reporting Center, FRC, is now seeking to know if the billions of the shillings earned from the online betting craze in Kenya were declared to the gaming regulator, the Betting Control and Licensing Board, BCLB, and if Sport Pesa also paid taxes on the 30 billion shillings in question. Now, two major stakeholders in the company, Paul Wanderi Ndungu and Asnath Maina, who own a combined 38% stake in the Sport Pesa's holding company, Pivans East Africa, last month gave insight into what has been ongoing shareholder wars that have been affecting them since 2017, partly also behind the transfer of funds to offshore accounts. Okay, now let's give you an update on this story this morning, because we do know that this company, Pivans East Africa, has now been given access to accounts that were frozen by KRA, and now KRA is going for principal tax of 9.02 million, another principal tax of 3.29 million, and penalties accruing from this principal tax and payment of 2.47 million, which is going to total to 14.7 million shillings. Good. I would ask you, George, first. I mean, this name Sport Pesa is not going away. So, I mean, what is left of the betting business in the country in what is the most over-regulated industry in what I would call Eastern Central Africa?
I think, Elijah, first things first, I want to look at the betting industry or the gaming industry as it is.
Yes.
What is its contribution to the economy, and why is the taxman so hard on them?
Yes.
From an economic perspective, the betting industry is not a productive industry, meaning the value that it adds into the economy cannot be quantified, or is not much. That is why the government really levies very heavy taxes so that it can get as much as it can from this industry. If you look at the way Sport Pesa or the way Pevans Limited was incorporated under the shareholding,
yes,
a bigger percentage of the shareholding were foreign shareholders, and quite a large chunk of the money, Elijah can bet you, was wired back to Eastern Europe. So if you look at it from a layman's perspective, millions and millions of Kenyans collected quite a big kitty to Sports Pesa Limited, but a big percentage of this money found its way out of the country. You talk of 30 billion, assuming that amount is correct. That is a huge sum of money, Elijah.
Yes.
And that is why I agree with the taxman that this industry should be taxed even more, so that we retain some of those monies in the economy to build our sporting industry, but also to support the government's programs. If you look at the controversies that have dogged this company between the time it was closed and now, there were issues. One with taxes, which have not been resolved to date.
Yes.
And then
yes,
it is coming into play that there are what we call boardroom wars between the local shareholders and the foreign shareholders. And Sport Pesa tried to come back, but under different company, that is Milestone Games Limited. You don't take a brand that belongs to one company and you want to use it in another company. I think that from corporate law, that is not allowed. And I think the government might not be able to allow that. If Milestone wants to come into the industry and push this business, then they must come with a new brand altogether. But they cannot use a brand that was used by one company, that is Pevans Limited, to push the business of Milestone Games Limited. So I agree with the government that one, this industry should be heavily taxed. Because if you look at the net economic impact of this industry to the economy,
yes,
is quite negligible. Therefore, if it is taxed, then at least you can get something out of it. And then this money should be retained in the economy so that it grows the economy. Not that you contribute a lot of money, but it finds its way out of the country. That is where the money laundering claim comes in, Elijah.
Pretty much. Sid, I would like to ask you whether you share the same sentiment with George this morning. George says, tax them further. But here is KRA that doesn't have money right now. Would you rather they operate and then don't tax them that much?
It's for me, it's already substantially taxed. It's close to 50%, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, it's actually more than 50%.
Yeah. So
yes.
When for a company, if you're losing more than half your profits to the government, and at the same time, the issue for me is that the government doesn't do much with our money.
Yes.
So when we look at it from that view, it does bring complications into the scenario. Whilst I do share George's sentiments, the only thing I would kind of disagree with is, there's a lot of CSR that comes into play when such companies operate in Kenya.
Yes.
Sponsorship deals were very, very good for a lot of our sports entities in Kenya, like the Kenya Premier League in football. Across the board, a lot of people did directly benefit, and maybe not the government, but a lot of people did directly benefit from the CSR initiative of Sports Pesa. And just from that social responsibility side, I do see the impact, some contribution to the economy which was made. There's also a ripple effect. By totally shutting them out of the market, there's a lot of other industries that lose out on money. For example, marketing.
Yes.
The marketing industry guaranteed took a good hit, and also with the ban by the betting licensing board on commercial advertising of betting. But you also have to look at it from a socio-economic perspective. And what I mean by that is, one, what is betting doing to our country, as George said, the net economic effect. And when we look at that, and we also include the socio-economic effect of this, a lot of our youth who are unemployed are being sort of, if I may say, wooed into this whole betting culture.
Yes.
And trying to make a quick buck out of something which does have a longer lasting impact than Sports Pesa operating in our economy would have. A betting culture is an addictive culture. Once you get hooked onto betting, you can, I know of people, I've heard of people who've lost everything just because of betting. And when you look at it from that perspective, whatever the government will do to clamp down on that issue would be healthy for our economy in the long run.
Yes.
But the whole issue for Sports Pesa and the way they left the market and their re-entry into the market, just there's question marks all over it. As George said, you can't just be operating with one entity, having a trademark registered. And yeah, fine, by law, you can have an assignment of a trademark and allow another person to use it. But then why all of a sudden does Sports Pesa come into the market using a new entity when, as George has mentioned, there are already tax battles they're facing with KRA, which have not been settled. So it would be good corporate governance. It would be prudent enough from their side if they were first to, clean up all their affairs.
Yes.
With Pepper East Africa.
Yes.
And then possibly come into the market and trade again using the Sports Pesa brand name. But this whole thing otherwise seems a bit dodgy.
Pretty much. All right, let's move on to the last issue that we have for you this morning, where manufacturers and suppliers now have plans to commence blacklisting of supermarkets which default on payment for services and goods offered, in a move they hope will reduce losses in an environment that has wiped off giants from the retail sector. with some of them going down with billions in debt owed to suppliers. Now, big names that graced the sector like Nakumat, Uchumi and Tuskys have gone down with nearly 30 billion shillings owed to suppliers in under 5 years, spelling doom for the suppliers and traders who normally have nowhere to turn to once the chains get liquidated. Now, the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, CAM, now indicates that the credit information sharing mechanism between factories and suppliers signed a fortnight ago is the magic bullet to stopping retailers from moving from one supplier to the next once they fail to pay for the supplies. Now, the industry credit group ICG, to be managed by the very credit, will enable members of CAM and Association of Kenya Suppliers to unanimously share payment history of different supermarkets, helping them shape the decision of suppliers. It's modeled on the credit reference bureaus that offers lenders borrowers loan repayment information, including defaulters. Fine, this looks like good news, but George, is this a game changer, as the Kenya Association of Manufacturers is calling it? And from where you're sitting this morning, why do we have such a huge default rate from supermarkets in the country?
Elijah, if you look at the retail subsector in Kenya,
yes,
you look at a very loosely crafted sector, which plays a very important role in the economy. If you compare the retail sector with the banking sector, with the insurance sector, with the manufacturing sector, then you see a sector that is not regulated, a sector that doesn't have rules of the game, a sector that doesn't have somebody to check what they're doing. For a long time, I think it is what you call the law of the jungle in the retail subsector. And if you look at the way the subsector is crafted, there is what we call the buyer power, which is more than the supplier power. The supermarkets have a very strong buyer power. They can literally get away with anything. That is why they've really mishandled most of their suppliers. In fact, if you talk to some of the suppliers to some of these big supermarkets, they'll tell you that they would rather supply to the smaller supermarkets, or the estate mini markets, as opposed to the bigger supermarkets, because the bigger supermarkets have so much power that they would get away with any request that they make to this supplier.
yes.
So I think what CAM is proposing is the first step towards a longer journey in trying to regulate this sector. I would want to see Capital Markets Authority coming in with a raft of measures, even though some of these companies might not qualify to be regulated, but they can do it if their act was amended, so that this sector can be regulated. I know of a number of suppliers in this sector who have lost livelihoods when Nakumat went down, and now that Tuskys is struggling, and even Uchumi. You don't want to affect that value chain down there because of some let me call them unscrupulous traders.
Yes.
in this subsector.
Yes.
Remember, this sector is crafted in such a way that the bigger guys sell on cash, but they get credit from the suppliers up to 90, 120, 180 days. So your question is, where does this money go, Elijah? When you walk into any of the big supermarkets, I bet you not that you cannot go there and ask them for credit. You'll have to pay cash for anything that you buy from them. Then the question is, where does this money end into if suppliers cannot be paid? So I think this is one step towards the right direction, but I would want to see more regulation in this space to ensure that this sector is sustainable, and that people don't lose livelihoods because of a few unscrupulous traders in that subsector, Elijah.
Pretty much. Sid, I'm going to come back to you on the same story, because it's astounding that, well, big retail chains in the country could go down with something like 30 billion. Sid, what somebody's going to ask you is, the retail sector, especially in the supermarket space, quite hard to crack in the country, and why?
Elijah, I share a lot of George's sentiment. I mean, we are operating in the retail sector, the supermarket sector especially.
Yes.
When you wield so much power in an economy and you go unregulated, and whereby our government has allowed retailers to self-regulate themselves, it's alarming because these are people who affect a lot of livelihoods along the value chain. And when there's no regulation to back that up, I mean, you can take advantage of your dominant position in the economy and take advantage of suppliers. I know of, not to give names or anything, but I know of two major supermarkets in our country who, if you were to supply them any products, and if you look at the way the payment model is structured, by the time you actually receive a payment from them, one, it's either delayed, and two, the amount of margins and so-called different expenses that they cut into, it's alarming. You're looking at close to 25, 30 to 35% of whatever you supplied them is going straight into their pockets. And for some of these things, you just seem to wonder what sort of expenses are they actually claiming. And if we look at the issue of regulation, I mean, if you look at other countries, and the example I'd like to use is London. London have implemented something called a prompt payment code. And I know Kenya on the verge of implementing this, and I don't know why Parliament is really not pushing up on this. But under the prompt payment code, it's set in stone, and there's regulation that if you are a supplier of FMCG, so any fast-moving consumer goods, you must be paid within 30 days from the invoice date.
Yes.
I mean, there's no room for negotiation between you and your supplier.
Yes.
And if it's any other goods, I think it's 45 days, if I'm not wrong. So when we have such policies in place and such regulations in place, it allows some fiscal space for our suppliers in the value chain. I mean, if you know you're going to be guaranteed payment within 30 days of your invoice date, or within 45 days of your invoice date, one, it allows you to plan. It allows you to plan your cash flows. And cash flows do, really affect, given that the retail space is a heavily cash-involved business, if your cash flows are not healthy enough, I mean, you are going to tank at one point. And another point I'd like to allude to is the level of mismanagement, if I may put it, and to borrow George's word, unscrupulous traders. Mismanagement in the retail space it's been bad. Like if you look at Nakumat, I know of instances where the company were giving its directors, the founder was facing so Nakumat's founder has been facing investigation for the loss of $100 million worth of stock. That's a lot of money, and that's purely based on mismanagement. We've not managed to get good corporate governance structures implemented in such huge companies, and with that level of mismanagement, I mean, it's going to really affect your cash flows and your ability to pay up suppliers. Another example is where Nakumat has lent interest-free loans to its directors, amounting close to over $1 billion shillings.
Yes.
And such figures are alarming because it means you're removing money out of the company without any security, and in the event of any default, and if you don't have any security, that means that money is gone. And if you remove close to $1 billion shillings from your books today, I'm 110% sure, and I'm pretty sure George will share my sentiments, that is going to affect your cash flows significantly. And the same is for Tuskies.
Yes.
Tuskies is following a very familiar script as that of Nakumat, and that debt-fueled expansion, claims of fraud, internal wrangles between the shareholders. It all leads to this level of mismanagement that really affects not the supermarket or the retailer itself, but the whole value chain. Which there is a way to ensure that these things don't happen again, and the only way I strongly feel, and to echo George's sentiments again, is we need to put in place regulation to ensure that retail outlets as big as these don't abuse their dominant market positions in the economy.
Yes. George, if you can clear us for us this conversation this morning in just 3 minutes, because that's all the time that we have left. Well, CAM now has this plan in place. Good. But George, they're modeling it on what would look the same as what a CRB does, George. But is it not inverse? A supplier is not essentially a lender. You have goods. You don't have money. You need to make money out of that. Do you think that that's where the holes are in this plan?
I think, Elijah, as I told you, that is one step towards the right direction.
Yes.
My only worry is this backed by any legal provisions? Remember,
Yes.
CRB is backed by the Banking Act.
Yes.
I don't know how CAM is trying to manage this so that it is backed by the law. But as I speak, I think there has been challenges in that industry. And I think CAM is trying to come up with ways just to address some of those challenges, and that is a step in the right direction. But I bet you not that CAM should come up with should lobby Parliament to pass regulation so that the sector comes under the armpits of either the Capital Markets Authority or any other body that will be put in place to manage this sector. But as it were, I think things are not very good in that sector. As I told you, the biggest markets have a very strong buyer power, such that when they come to any supplier, supply would bend to that power to malign or to malign the very many suppliers that they operate with. So I think the onus is on Kenyan steel manufacturers, but even the suppliers themselves should have a lobby to try and push their case with the government, so that at least they have a voice. As it were, I think those are the areas that the suppliers need to look at if they are to address the challenges in this sector.
Pretty much. George Seed, thank you very much for joining us this morning on our Business AM. And that exactly marks the end of Business AM today. Good morning. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiag.